Can love survive society's judgment? This couple's journey will leave you inspired and questioning your own assumptions. It was the smell of fresh paint that Olivia remembered most from that evening. The community art fundraiser at the Pasadena Art Center was bustling, and the energy in the room felt alive with possibility. Olivia, 34 years old, had reluctantly agreed to display her work, a collection of abstract paintings inspired by her late mother's poetry. She hadn't expected much beyond polite applause and a few kind words. That's when she noticed him. Quietly observing her favorite piece from the corner of the room, he sat in a sleek black wheelchair, his posture calm but confident. His presence felt grounded, almost magnetic. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, intensely focused, as if he saw something others didn't. When their eyes met, he smiled, a gentle yet disarming gesture. "Beautiful work," he said, nodding toward the painting. "It feels honest." Olivia was taken aback. Most people threw around vague compliments, but this felt different. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft with surprise. Honesty was the goal, I guess. The man introduced himself as Daniel, a public defender with a reputation for taking on difficult cases. He wasn't from Pasadena, but had been invited by a colleague who swore this event would be worth his time. As they spoke, Olivia found herself laughing more than she had in months. There was something refreshing about Daniel's candid humor and thoughtful questions. But beneath the surface of their easy conversation, Olivia couldn't ignore her curiosity. The wheelchair wasn't the first thing she noticed, but it lingered in her mind. She didn't want to ask, didn't want to pry. Yet it seemed Daniel sensed her hesitation. "I was in a car accident," he said, his tone casual but firm. 5 years ago. It's part of who I am now, but it doesn't define me." His words hung in the air for a moment before Olivia nodded, her respect for him deepening. "I'm sorry you went through that," she said sincerely. "But I can see it's made you strong." Daniel smiled again, this time with a touch of gratitude. "Strength is a work in progress. But hey, it's not all bad. I have an excuse to skip leg day." The ice was broken, and from that moment, their connection felt effortless. They spent the rest of the evening talking about everything from art to Daniel's love of jazz music. Olivia hadn't planned on staying late, but hours passed in what felt like minutes. As the event wound down, Daniel handed her his business card. "I'd love to continue this conversation," he said. "If you're up for it." Olivia hesitated for a moment before accepting. "I think I'd like that." As she walked back to her car that night, her mind was racing. Something about Daniel felt different. Not just intriguing, but safe, like she could be herself without fear of judgment. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she knew she wanted to see him again. What Olivia didn't realize yet was just how much their paths would intertwine, or how their love would challenge everything they thought they knew about resilience, acceptance, and what it means to truly see someone. Daniel didn't always live in a wheelchair. 5 years earlier, his life had looked very different. He was a rising star at a law firm in Santa Barbara, known for his quick wit and relentless work ethic. He thrived on the chaos of his career, balancing high-profile cases and marathon runs on the weekends. For Daniel, life was a series of perfectly planned moves, until the accident shattered everything. It happened on a rainy October night as he drove back from a late meeting. A truck swerved into his lane, headlights blinding him for a split second before the impact. The sound of crunching metal was deafening, and the world seemed to tilt sideways. When he woke up in the hospital, the doctor's words felt surreal. Spinal cord injury. Permanent paralysis from the waist down. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's life became a blur of surgeries, physical therapy sessions, and an avalanche of emotions he couldn't quite process. He went through cycles of anger and grief, mourning the man he used to be. Simple things, like putting on his shoes or getting out of bed, became monumental challenges. He hated the way strangers looked at him now, their pity more suffocating than his own pain. But Daniel was stubborn, and that trait became both his curse and his salvation. He refused to accept the pity he despised. Instead, he channeled his frustration into rebuilding his life. It wasn't easy. Learning to navigate the world in a wheelchair meant reimagining nearly every aspect of his routine, from his morning coffee to his career. There were setbacks, of course. Early on, he had to confront the reality of losing friends who didn't know how to handle his new normal. Invitations stopped coming, and phone calls grew infrequent. He realized how conditional some relationships could be. But it wasn't all bleak. His sister, Megan, became his rock, showing up unannounced with groceries and pep talks when he needed them most. His law firm wasn't just supportive, they celebrated his return. Daniel's first case post-accident was defending a young single mother who had been wrongfully terminated from her job. The courtroom felt different now. He could see the stares, hear the whispered assumptions. But instead of letting them crush him, he used them. He turned his presence into a statement. Resilience wasn't just a word. It was a way of living. Still, there was a void. Romance had always been complicated for Daniel, but now it felt impossible. He convinced himself that women wouldn't see past the wheelchair, that they'd pity him rather than love him. So he focused on his career, telling himself it was enough. But even the most carefully built walls can crack when you least expect it. And Olivia's unexpected kindness began chipping away at his defenses. Their second meeting wasn't planned. Olivia had been visiting the Pasadena Public Library to drop off some donated art supplies when she saw Daniel at a nearby cafe. He was engrossed in a thick legal file, his coffee untouched. For a moment, she hesitated. What if he didn't remember her? But the pull to say hello was stronger than her doubt. "Reading anything interesting?" she asked, standing just behind him. Daniel looked up, surprised, then smiled warmly. "Just some light reading." "On employment law," he replied. "What about you donating your masterpieces?" They fell into an easy conversation, the kind that felt like picking up right where they'd left off. Olivia joined him at the table, and soon an hour turned into 2. He asked her about her art, genuinely curious about what inspired her bold, abstract style. She, in turn, found herself captivated by the way he spoke about his work, not just as a job, but as a way to make a difference. Over the next few weeks, their friendship deepened. They exchanged texts and met for coffee when their schedules allowed. It wasn't long before Olivia noticed she looked forward to those moments more than she cared to admit. Daniel's dry humor, his thoughtful insights, and his ability to make her laugh, even on tough days. Everything about him felt different from anyone she'd ever known. For Daniel, Olivia was like a breath of fresh air. She didn't tread carefully around him or treat him like he was fragile. She teased him, laughed at his bad jokes, and never once let the wheelchair overshadow their conversations. It was disarming in the best way possible. But as their connection grew, so did their challenges. Their first official date, a small jazz concert downtown, was marked by a harsh reminder of the world they lived in. A couple seated nearby exchanged awkward glances, whispering just loud enough for Olivia to hear. She felt her face flush with anger, but Daniel, ever perceptive, placed a hand lightly on hers. "They're not worth it," he said softly. "Let's focus on the music." It was a small moment, but it stuck with Olivia. She realized how often Daniel must have dealt with similar reactions, and how much grace it took to rise above them. It also made her fiercely protective of him, though she knew he didn't need her to be. Then there were the physical realities of their relationship. Planning simple outings became a lesson in patience and adaptability. Some restaurants didn't have ramps, and others had tables too cramped to accommodate Daniel's wheelchair. Olivia found herself noticing things she'd never considered before, like the height of a curb or the weight of a door. But instead of letting these challenges push them apart, they grew closer. Daniel's humor softened the edges of even the most frustrating situations. One night, after an elevator broke down in the middle of a date, they ended up eating takeout on the steps of Olivia's apartment building. "Not quite the romantic dinner I had in mind," Daniel joked, balancing a carton of noodles on his lap. "I don't know," Olivia replied, nudging him playfully. "I think this might be better." Their love story wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated, full of moments that tested their patience and their courage. But it was also real, and that made it beautiful. They didn't need grand gestures or sweeping declarations. The quiet moments, the late-night talks, the shared laughter, the unspoken understanding, were more than enough. But even as their love deepened, life had a way of testing them in ways they couldn't predict, forcing them to confront fears they'd long kept buried. It was during a crisp February morning when the first real test of their relationship arrived. Uninvited and relentless. Olivia had been preparing for an upcoming gallery showcase, her biggest yet. The stress was mounting, and though she tried to balance her time, it became harder to meet Daniel as often as before. He understood, he always did. But Olivia could sense his growing frustration, even if he didn't voice it. Then came the breaking point. Olivia's gallery event was held at a historic building downtown. She'd been assured that the space was accessible, but when Daniel arrived, they realized the elevator was out of service. There was no ramp for the grand staircase leading to the exhibition floor. Olivia's heart sank as she rushed to meet him in the lobby. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "They told me everything would be fine." "It's okay," Daniel interrupted, though his expression told a different story. "This isn't your fault." But it felt like her fault. She wanted him there, to see her work, to share in her big night. Instead, she watched as he smiled tightly, insisting she go back upstairs and enjoy the evening. She didn't want to leave him, but he wouldn't hear otherwise. That night, as she stood before a room full of admirers, Olivia felt an ache she couldn't ignore. Success felt hollow without Daniel by her side. When she finally returned to him, long after the event had ended, the tension was palpable. "I'm sorry," she said again, sitting beside him on the couch. "I should have checked. I should have." "Olivia, stop," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You can't fix everything." His words stung. Not because they were unkind, but because they were true. She realized then how much weight she'd been carrying. Not just her own expectations, but the unspoken pressure to make everything perfect for him. And in her quest to shield him from discomfort, she'd overlooked one simple truth. Daniel didn't want perfection. He wanted honesty. The following weeks were hard. Their once easy conversations turned strained, each misunderstanding piling onto the last. They both retreated into their own worlds, unsure of how to bridge the growing distance. Olivia threw herself into her art, while Daniel buried himself in his work. But life has a way of forcing clarity. One evening, Daniel received a call from his sister, Megan. Their father, who had been battling Parkinson's for years, had taken a turn for the worse. Without hesitation, Olivia insisted on accompanying Daniel to the hospital in San Diego. The long drive was mostly quiet, the tension between them still unspoken but heavy. Yet as they sat together in the sterile hospital room, watching over Daniel's father, something shifted. Olivia saw a side of Daniel she hadn't fully understood before. A man grappling with his own vulnerability while carrying the weight of his family's pain. Later that night, as they sat in the hospital cafeteria, Daniel finally spoke. "I've been pushing you away," he admitted, staring down at his coffee. "I didn't mean to. But sometimes it feels easier to shut people out than to let them see how hard it is." Olivia reached for his hand. "I see you, Daniel. All of you. And I'm not going anywhere." Her words cracked the armor he'd been wearing for so long. For the first time in weeks, they really talked, about their fears, their frustrations, and the challenges that came with loving each other. By the time they left the hospital, the distance between them felt smaller, replaced by a renewed sense of understanding. But while their bond was stronger, they both knew that love alone wasn't enough. It was the choices they made every day that would truly define their future. Spring arrived with a sense of renewal, and so did Olivia and Daniel's relationship. The storm they had weathered left scars, but it also deepened their bond. They began to approach their challenges with a new mindset, not as obstacles to overcome, but as opportunities to grow together. One of those opportunities came in the form of a community project. Olivia had been invited to lead an art therapy workshop for veterans struggling with PTSD, many of whom used wheelchairs or faced other mobility challenges. She hesitated at first, unsure if she could do justice to such an important cause. But Daniel encouraged her. "You've got more empathy than anyone I know," he told her one night as they brainstormed ideas. "And you know what it's like to use art as a way to heal." Daniel joined her as a volunteer, offering legal advice to veterans navigating benefits and housing issues. The workshop became a shared labor of love, a place where Olivia's creativity and Daniel's compassion found new purpose. Watching him interact with the veterans, Olivia felt a deep sense of pride. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving, using his experiences to uplift others. Their partnership also extended to their personal lives. They learned to communicate better, to be honest about their needs and fears. Daniel admitted that he sometimes struggled with the limitations of his wheelchair, not because of the chair itself, but because of how society often made him feel invisible. Olivia, in turn, shared her insecurities about balancing her career and their relationship. One weekend, they decided to take a road trip to Joshua Tree National Park, a place neither of them had visited before. It was a spontaneous plan, born out of a desire to break free from their routines. They rented an accessible cabin, packed a cooler with snacks, and spent their days exploring the stark beauty of the desert. On their last evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Daniel turned to Olivia. "You know," he said, his voice filled with quiet wonder, I didn't think I'd ever have this." "What do you mean?" she asked, her hand resting on his. "This," he said, gesturing to the vast expanse before them. "Someone who sees me, not just the chair, not just the man I used to be, but all of it." Olivia smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "You've given me the same thing, Daniel, and I wouldn't trade it for anything." Their journey hadn't been easy, and it wouldn't be in the future. But they'd come to understand that love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up day after day and choosing each other, even when it was hard. As they drove back to Pasadena the next morning, Olivia found herself reflecting on how much she'd learned from Daniel. Not just about resilience, but about the strength it takes to be vulnerable. Their story wasn't one of fairy tales or sweeping romance. It was real, raw, and imperfect. And that made it all the more powerful. Because love, at its core, isn't about what's easy. It's about what's worth it. And together, they had found something truly worth fighting for. If this story moved you, take a moment to think about the people in your life who see you for who you truly are. Share this video with someone who inspires you, and let them know how much they mean to you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories that celebrate the beauty of resilience and connection.